And let's get more now with correspondent Jörg Brase, who is joining us from Tehran. He is a correspondent with the German public broadcaster ZDF. Jörg, we saw the regime bringing out tens of thousands of supporters over the weekend. How are these tough sanctions likely to affect support for Iran's leaders?
Well, what we saw, the pictures we saw on the weekend, of course, was a well-staged propaganda show organized by the Iranian government. As you said, they shipped thousands of people from all over the country to Tehran to send out a strong signal of national unity. But if you talk to the people, the majority, I think, is, of course, dissatisfied with the performance of the Rouhani government. The people saw the prices going up over the last couple of months. They saw the value of their national currency going down, and many might lose their jobs in the next weeks. So the people are disappointed, but to my impression, the potential of disappointment is still not big enough to be taken to the streets.
And on the political level, Washington says that its sanctions, that they're aimed at curbing Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs and what it calls support for terror. So ultimately, do you think that we're likely to see the regime backing down there in Iran?
We're referring to the public statements made by both the Rouhani government and the religious leadership. I'd say no. I mean, President Rouhani went on television this morning and he repeated that the Iranian government is not ready to talk to the United States as long as they keep up their precondition. I think it's about finding a face-saving way for bringing the Iranian leadership to the negotiating table and to include the conventional weapons, because after the lift of the sanctions in 2015, Iran substantially beefed up their support for the Lebanese Hezbollah militia. They are now posing a massive threat to Israel, and this is, in my opinion, the actual background for the US reimposing the sanctions. But at the moment, I think Iran is not ready to talk about their conventional weapons.
And of course, Tehran says that it's going to get around these sanctions, but how exactly are they planning on doing that?
Well, there are certain measures that have been taken over the last couple of days. I don't think that the Iranians really count on European support. So what they did is, for example, they reopened a chamber of the Tehran Stock Exchange, trying to bring buyers and sellers together of oil anonymously. And then there's another story that there have been about 11 million barrels of crude oil being stored on tankers in the Persian Gulf. The Iranian oil tankers switched off their radar in order not to be found and tracked. But on the other hand, the US have established a task force trying to detect these loopholes and prevent Iran from generating income. So I think what we are going to see over the next couple of weeks is kind of a hide-and-seek game between Tehran and Washington.
ZDF correspondent Jörg Brase with The View from Tehran. Thank you. And Iran says that it is working with Europe to set up a mechanism to bypass those sanctions. Let's bring in Brussels correspondent Terry Schultz. Terry, could this actually happen?
The European Union maintains that it will happen. Just Friday, Federica Mogherini, EU foreign policy chief, and the governments of France, Germany, and the UK said that their resolve to both maintain the nuclear deal with Iran and to maintain economic support for European companies doing business in Iran is unwavering. So the European Union says it's setting up this so-called special purpose vehicle, which would allow payments to go in and out of Iran and bypassing U.S. sanctions. That's how it's envisioned. And the EU maintains that this is going to happen, although it's not operational today. At the same time, the U.S. has yet another lever, and that is to demand that SWIFT, that's the Belgium-based financial messaging service, which handles most of the world's interbank messaging. The U.S. says SWIFT has to cut off all the sanctions Iranian institutions. And so if that happens, it's hard to see how Iran could get around the sanctions, regardless of how creative they're being.
How about European companies themselves? Because we know that the United States has threatened them if they don't adhere to these sanctions. Are they likely to do so or not?
Yes, we have seen European companies pulling out of Iran, and that's despite the EU itself threatening sanctions on companies that pull out because of the U.S. sanctions. So these companies are really in a tough spot because both Brussels and Washington are saying they must obey. But what we have seen is an exodus of European companies and some very big German companies among them deciding that simply their bottom line cannot support being in a confrontation with Washington, and that whatever losses they have to take by cutting contracts in Iran and possibly annoying Brussels is going to be worth it.
DW's Terry Schultz with some initial indications here of how these sanctions are likely to impact European business. Thank you, Terry.